Time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is going to be number 130 during the time of the pandemic, and we are recording it on December 8th for the week of December 10th. We're going to have a former alderman, a professor, a guy with a lot of knowledge about politics, both here in Chicago and beyond, the one and only Dick Simpson. And then we have a professor from international studies at DePaul. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'm going to try it anyhow. Kaveh, K-A-V-E-H, Ehsani, E-H-S-A-N-I. And he is going to talk about Iran, and we'll hear a little bit about post-World Cup, the demonstrations in the street, a little history. I'm looking forward to it. So that's the deal for today. Let's get started. Good things that happened to me. I got a call from my daughter, Koya Paz, asking me if I could pick up my granddaughter, Ida Rocket, because Koya was in a meeting. And I really had the honor of going by her school yesterday and picking her up. And we stopped at the First Slice, the Pie Cafe up there on 5357 North Ashland. And they donate a lot of food for the homeless, and they make great pie. So we had a good time riding around, coming back here to the house until her mom picked her up. And we did have pizza and French fries and rib tips. She didn't, I did. And some delicious pie. So that was a good thing. Another good thing is the Biden administration expanded protection for Haitian migrants. With his announcement, 110,000 Haitians in the United States could gain permission to stay for at least 18 months, and others who already have protections will see them, increased. So we're going to see what happens. That was reported from the New York Times, and we've all probably, some of us will remember seeing how migrants from Haiti, they come to the shores of America, they get rounded up and sent back, whereas the Cubans got to stay. Many of you know that Haiti has been hit with earthquakes and a lot of turmoil, so we're going to try to follow what goes on there a little bit more, and we're glad to hear about this. Let me see. A not so good thing is that the president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, who was a farmer, a peasant, progressive. He was elected the president of Peru, and they have tried to impeach him twice, and they are trying a third time. Let me see. Anyhow, that's in the New York Times, and it's something to watch because there's been an ongoing wave of progressive people elected to leadership positions throughout Latin America, and the Castillo victory was one of those that we talked about at some point in the opening of one of our shows. So let's pay attention to that and see if we can get some more information on it. In case you missed last week's show, let me let you know that we had Carl Davidson, an old pal from Students for Democratic Society, talking about world politics and perspective and how we look at things. And then we had our pal Gordon Thompson, a former coach at both Loyola and DePaul, who coached a lot of All-American cross-country and track people. He came on and gave a sports report with a lot of detail about the World Cup and what was going on. And then we had Andrea Bunch and Alicia Hurtado coming on and talking about an event called Cover for Cover, which is benefiting the Chicago Women's Abortion Network. You might like that. You can go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia and even /videos, and you'll see last week's show. And there are hundreds and hundreds of shows that you could watch if you so desire. Okay, so a little more news here. On the labor front, a number of people were pretty irked by Biden getting Congress to put through a no-strike bill to avert a rail strike. He signed the bill on Friday to end months of uncertainty and anxiety about a potential rail strike. The new law put into effect a contract between labor unions and the freight rail industry, despite the fact that 4 of those unions had voted against the contract's ramification. This week will not bring rail shutdowns and frenzied negotiations like we saw in September, since Congress decided to step up. Biden signed the bill on Friday. The new law put into effect the contract. Nick Nedwaski said a rail shutdown could have dealt a devastating blow to an already fragile supply chain and economy. But the solution, denying unions the right to strike, giving railroad companies an out where they didn't want to give paid sick days to their workers, leaves a sour taste in the mouth of organized labor. The president said he'll keep working to get paid leave, not just for the rail workers, but for every American worker. On the sports front, some good news. The University of Chicago's Julian Stitch, S-I-T-C-H, has become the first woman to lead a men's team to an NCAA title. The Chicago Maroons, that's the University of Chicago team, defeated Williams College 2-0 to win its first ever national title. Stitch is in her first season as the coach of the men's team after previously coaching the school's women's team and also coaching in the professional soccer, National Women's Soccer League. Stitch played professionally for 14 seasons, and she finished her career with the Chicago Red Stars. And she has gotten the Maroons to a 22-0-1 record in her first season at the helm. Her squad opened the season ranked number 4, and they held that ranking throughout. The only contest that they lost was to NYU on October 14th, which was a historic matchup. The game was the first ever meeting between 2 NCAA men's soccer programs to be coached by women. So this information is coming from The Athletic, part of the New York Times. You have to pay a little extra, I think, now. Other things on the sports front, we're really sorry that the White Sox have traded Jose Abreu, our first baseman from Cuba. They traded him, I think, to the Astros. I watched the Loyola DePaul game. I have loyalties to both of those schools. And DePaul actually beat Loyola. And on other fronts, the USA is out of the World Cup. And the Bulls, they're doing so-so. The Bears look good sometimes. We've been looking forward to some baseball. Okay, so that's it for our sports report. And I got a little information from our friend Dave Kraft, who is part of the Nuclear Energy Information Service. And he, in an email, said, "Stop Senator Joe Manchin's sneaky effort to get the dirty deal pipeline bill passed. Manchin is once again trying to pass his dirty deal. We stopped it once. Now we need to fight hard to stop it again. This time he's trying to attach the deal to the National Defense Authorization Act. This is another classic attempt by big oil to sneak fossil fuel expansion into some other bill. This can't stand. We have a short window to stop the dirty deal from passing. He's asking everyone to take 2 minutes to call their representatives, like Mike Quigley and Senators Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, to tell them to oppose Manchin's dirty deal. So you can get more if you go to the Nuclear Energy Information Service. So that's it. I think we're going to take a short musical break, and we'll be back with our first guest, the one, the only Dick Simpson, a longtime advocate for social change and progressive politics. He served as an early progressive alderman here in Chicago, teaches at University of Illinois Circle, and he's going to fill us in on his observations about elections, politics, etc. We'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland here on the left end of your dial. We're back with more Live from the Heartland, and I'm really glad that you all are either watching it on YouTube or CAN TV, or getting on a podcast on Spotify or Google Podcasts, or getting it on air and streamed on Saturday mornings from WLUW 88.7, WLUW.org. And it's been a long time since we had this next fellow on the show, but we're always glad to have him on. The one and only Dick Simpson, a former alderman, a longtime progressive fellow, who is going to give us a little political analysis, his view of what's going on in the world. Good morning to you, Dick Simpson.
Hi, Michael. I hope I don't have to cover the whole world in this brief period, but I will cover Illinois, the United States, and of course the main event, the Chicago upcoming election.
Well, let's start with the first one. What was that?
Illinois.
Let's talk about Illinois, because that is our...
Illinois was good news in the November election. The biggest thing that is a little bit under the radar, not everyone watched as closely, is the congressional districts and the congressional races. The Democrats had nearly a clean sweep of every conceivable race that they ran in. The margin of the Democrats in the last round, or the current Congress, was 13 Democrats and 5 Republicans. We lost a seat because of census count. We're down a little bit in Illinois. But the new combination is 14 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And we not only won in the suburbs, which we've been doing consistently, people like Lauren Underwood, but we won downstate in 2 districts that were very, very important. So that's part of the reason, and the bigger picture of the United States, that the Republicans failed to get the Senate, and they failed they did get the House, but only by 4 or 5 votes. So that's an amazing feat in a midterm election. The other thing I mentioned in the Tribune op-ed that I published this week is that the youth are really the defining new point in elections. And at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where I taught for 55 years, we've almost doubled the number of students that are voting. We now have 81% of our students who are registered to vote. And the turnout in 2020 was 67%. We don't have the numbers from 2022 yet, but we became the early voting site for the 34th ward, new ward gerrymandered in Chicago. And that sort of record is happening a lot of places. Happened at Northwestern earlier, happens to some extent at the University of Chicago, and on down the list of universities in our region. And in fact, it was critical in some of the races downstate. Universities that are not as well known really turned out the vote, which gave the Democrats the majority. Now, partly that's because the Republicans nominated Attila the Hun and his brothers for all of the races, and most of Illinois voters aren't prepared to have just a bunch of Trump clones running around loose. So that's the good news from Illinois. As most people know, this week the Democrats won in Georgia, and that has created a 51-49 balance in the U.S. Senate, which makes it more possible to stop some of Joe Manchin's effect, because he was the deciding vote in the Senate. He no longer is, but we still have a headwind. But we control the Senate, the presidency, and in the House, it's a very close margin. In the House, it turns out that the Republicans are badly split between what's called the Freedom Caucus, which is the Trumpers, and what used to be the Republican Party, the conservatives, or the moderate conservatives, relatively speaking. So it's not clear how well the Republicans will pull their act together in the next 2 years, other than do investigations here and there that they want to undertake. So I guess that's the news from Illinois, and a little bit of the news from the national level.
Let me ask you one question about that, about the House with the slim Republican majority. Some people have talked about Republican representatives from districts that voted for Biden and had very close elections themselves. What do you think will be the possibility that a few Republicans will jump ship and or just vote with Democrats on certain issues? Is there anyone to look at, to pressure, to wish positive thoughts in that direction?
I think it will happen. I think it'll happen piece of legislation by legislation. It's not going to be a general jumping of ships. But for instance, one of the bills that no one knows about is one that calls Civic Secures Democracy. It would give $1 billion for civic engagement education in the K through 12 schools, money we've never had. It would make civic engagement education somewhat similar to STEM education. It has bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. It's just a question of whether we can get enough votes. But that is something that Republicans can back. Some of the other issues will be more knee-jerk. They can't because they fear they'd lose the primary election to Trumpers if they got too far out. But there are some pieces of legislation that can get bipartisan support. Probably not all of them that we would like, but some of them.
Well, we're hopeful of all of that. I had another question. I wanted to follow up a little bit on you're talking about the youth vote turning out. What do you think is driving that? Do you think that we've got a new wave of young people coming on the scene? I mean, there are millions of people become of voting age every year, and clearly we need to be organizing in that area. But what do you think helped move it in that direction this time?
So I think there are three things. First of all, the abortion ruling of the Supreme Court galvanized many young people, both because they're women and they want to protect abortion rights, but they begin to see that they may lose all their rights if they don't get involved and have a government that respects them and covers their issues like climate change. So that was one driving force. The other is we've been doing much better in the universities, still not perfect, on civic engagement education, so that universities are making a concerted effort to register student voters and to turn out the vote in a nonpartisan way. They have to as a university. But I mentioned the UIC case, which is one of the best in the nation. We probably have more student participation in elections than any other public university in the country. We certainly have had the biggest growth in student participation. I mean, we're turning out 20,000 votes an election now from just UIC, not even counting the other universities in the Chicago region. And that begins to have a profound effect. As I say, it probably swung maybe the 17th district where Eric Sorensen won for Congress. It probably did the other downstate district as well, because there were a lot of universities in their districts, and the students turned out, and the students almost inevitably vote the same way. I would like to think, as I say in the op-ed this week, that maybe we've come full circle to the days of the 1960s, which you and I remember so well, when, all power to the people is not quite the same thing, but the youth are beginning to think they better take control of the country, otherwise it's going to go off the deep end.
Yeah, well, I'm going to follow up that with how do you think it came to be that University of Illinois Chicago is turning out so many votes? Has there been a concerted voter registration drive on campus? I know at DePaul, where I teach, there was some discussion and people encouraging voting. I get notices, someone come to the class and talk about it. I, of course, talk to my students, encourage them. Any sense of that? What's moving? Yeah,
so we worked for over a decade, ever since 2012, to change the situation. In 2012, only 42% of the students voted. We now are voting at 67% or something like that. And like I say, our registration has skyrocketed. We did some very practical things, and we learned from places like DePaul and Northwestern that had started a little earlier. One of the things we do is when we have our convocation, when students come to campus as freshmen and they get their student ID, they're automatically given a choice to register to vote. And that has driven our registration way up. We run a series of programs to cause people to pay more attention. We have Constitution Day, which always has more than 300 participants. We have the National Student Issues Convention. We have the series that I run called Chicago's Future, which brings in 15 outside speakers, mostly about Chicago politics, but it still motivates people, and so on down the list. We do National Voter Registration Day. These are little tricks, but the key has been we formed a civic engagement core group made up of faculty, administrators, and a few students that coordinate our activities. So it's not just you speaking in your class to however many students you have. It's a coordinated effort to have a year-round civic engagement calendar in which we each contribute the part of the programs we can to build a better base of student influence and understanding and engagement. It's a long-term task, but there's a lot of little tricks, and we know them. For instance, at the American Political Science Association, I published 3 books on teaching civic engagement, teaching and civic engagement across the disciplines, and teaching civic engagement globally, that really give a play-by-play book of how you should do it in like a political science class, but also across other disciplines.
What's the name of that book?
There are 3 of them, and they're all free. They're teaching civic engagement, and then there are 3 sets of them. And anyone can go to the American Political Science Association and get the ebook for free, or can go to Amazon and pay to have a hard copy printed.
Dick Simpson, let me follow up one more thing about future elections before we go to Chicago. On the Senate, there's a lot of talk already about the Democrats will have a rougher field in the next election, which is 2024, I believe. And do you any take on that? Do you see that as a done deal? Do you see it as we have a possibility of reversing that trend, et cetera?
So, yes, it's something like 29 Democratic senatorial seats are up for grabs, and only 10 Republican seats are up for grabs. So it's just the way it falls out. I think the election will turn on how the presidential election goes, because a number of these are going to be in very closely run statewide elections. Statewide elections now cost $20 to $40 million just to get to the starting block for a U.S. Senate race. Often they go past $100 million each. So it takes a lot of resources, but I think the tide will be whether or not the presidential race is clearly one way or the other. If it were a tied race, the Republicans would win back the Senate.
Do you have any sense you think Biden will run again, or do you think there's another candidate in the wings that we should be looking at?
I think Biden will run again, but I don't have any inside information. Somehow they fail to consult me each time. Well, I have worked for presidential candidates, but
after they see the show, they're going to get a hold of you, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll see it.
We have limited time, but you can come back anytime you want. I want to ask you 2 other things, no matter how long it takes. Let's talk about the upcoming city elections in November. February
and April.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
So in the mayoral race, several candidates will be knocked off the ballot. There really be only 4 candidates that have enough money to get the message out to the voters. So we will have a choice, and it will be important. I also think maybe the North Side will be the deciding factor, which is where probably most of your audience is. I'm backing Lori Lightfoot. I won't go into a long explanation of that. I would be happy if Chuy Garcia won. I think what's important is to recognize how big a change we had with the election of Lightfoot. I know some people are disappointed. She didn't do everything they wanted. She don't like her attitude, whatever. But if you look at where we were, after Harold Washington, we had people like Richard M. Daley and Rahm Emanuel, Mayor 1%. The switch back to reform and progressive politics as the centerpiece of government, I think is important. And I think either Lori or Chuy would continue us in that direction. So I'm hopeful that we will continue. I have a book coming out on Chicago mayors that is called Modern Mayors of Chicago from Harold Washington to Lori Lightfoot. I think that traces the arc pretty well of what's happened, and it's one we need to continue. 4 years, as we learned after Harold's death, is not long enough to be able to cement in the changes we need, even though it permanently changed Chicago politics. At the aldermanic level, particularly on the north side, 6 or 8 candidates running in most of the wards. Matt Martin was the only one who is on the ballot without an opponent. Most of the lakefront wards do have serious contests. I think Maria Haddon in the 49th will probably win, but the rest of them are pretty much up for grabs, sometimes with as many as 6, 8, or 10 candidates running in those wards. And those are all going to be very expensive elections. They're going to cost more than $250,000. In a ward like the 43rd ward, it's going to be closer to the $1 million mark for the winning candidate. So these are very important elections. So is the police election. We're electing police councils for the first time in Chicago's history, 3 per police district. Basically, the split in the people running for the police positions are between progressives who want to at least moderate police and get more social services, and the pro-police who want to simply hire as many cops as possible and crack down on all the evildoers in the city, according to their definition.
Let me ask you one more question, Dick. You mentioned you have a new book out, or you're working on a book. Do you have a new book out that you want to show us a picture of it? And there it is.
Yeah, this is the most important one, and it's the biggest one I've ever done, the most important I've ever written, 26. This is called Democracy's Rebirth, The View from Chicago. Came out last April. And what it does is trace the really critical problems facing America today, things like racial income inequality, corruption, non-participation. And it talks about forming a new democracy, redoing our democratic institutions. And it ties it all together, and it gives the advice of the best of political scientists and activists how to solve those problems. There are 25 specific suggestions in the book. And if we could do even a few of them, we would be a much further along towards reclaiming and giving our democracy rebirth.
Well, I'm going to want to get that book and read it. I've been messing around with ideas from my earlier times about a politics of affirmation, and I'll try to develop that and then talk to you about it. And let's have you back on in the not too far off. And okay. You're feeling okay? I know you had a little bout of something going on.
Well, I had a terrible illness. I had internal bleeding. I was in the hospital for 16 days, and I still have a little bit of heart surgery to go through. But I'm recovering and hope to stay active.
Well, you're looking pretty good for a guy from Texas.
There you go.
All right, brother. I want to thank you very much. And let's just be formal about this. I would like to have you back on live from the Heartland within the next 2 months.
Sounds like a deal.
All right. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial if you're listening in on Saturday morning, if you're watching it on YouTube or CAN TV, whatever. I hope you're enjoying it. We're going to take a short musical break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about Iran. Well, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of December 10th in the year 2022. I'm Michael James. I'm your host. And Iran, got to work on pronunciation, has been in the news for politics, for the deal that Obama brokered around nuclear energy being broken by the last president, the World Cup, a lot of stuff with Iran happening around the country, around the world. We're really glad to bring on a new friend, Kaveh Ehsani, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And he is a professor of international studies at the wonderful DePaul University. His current research is about the historical and contemporary impact of oil on society and politics. He's into a lot of stuff. And another thing is the political economy and geopolitics of post-revolution Iran. Thinking back about Iran, I first really became aware of Iran in 78, 79 during the revolution. And those of us who were that old and were around back then will remember that the Shah of Iran was let into the U.S. by President Jimmy Carter. And there was quite a reaction to that. hostages, U.S. hostages were taken. Things have not been too good since then between the two nations, although I think the people probably like each other. So good morning to you, Kaveh, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.
Where would you like to start? Do you want to give a little history of Iran so that people can get a sense of who and what we're talking about?
Sure. I mean, Iran is one of the major, largest countries in the Middle East, in West and Southwest Asia. It was never colonized. It was, but it became like a centerpiece of global rivalry between much stronger neighboring, empires: Russian Empire, British Empire in India, the Ottomans, Germans, the U.S. So it's really kind of Iran became the epicenter of where the Cold War began. Actually, in 1948, when the Allies had occupied Iran, the British and the Americans from the south, the Soviets from the north, as a way of provisioning the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And then the Soviet army kind of refused to evacuate, so did the American and British armies. And that's where the Cold War started in 1948, actually. So it's been the epicenter of global politics. And of course, oil, since the turn of 20th century, became a major, factor in all this, because oil was in the Middle East was first discovered in Iran in 1908. And, the whole conversion to fossil fuels and all that really kind of began with Iranian oil. I mean, famously, the British foreign minister, Lord Curzon, said that we sailed to the victory in the First World War on Persian oil, which they controlled entirely. The current multinational BP actually started in Iran. That's where their start was. So oil, geopolitics, global politics, have been, and imperial rivalries has really kind of shaped modern Iranian history. I mean, you mentioned the revolution in Iran in 1979. It behooves your audience, since we're talking about the origins, to kind of also remember that U.S. carried out a coup d'etat against a parliamentary elected government in Iran in 1953, and reinstalled the Shah against popular Iranian belief with the help of the Iranian military. So there's a lot of history of invasions, occupations, alliances. I mean, Iranians up to 1950s thought of, popular, ordinary Iranians thought of the US as an impartial world power that could actually help them kind of ward off the much more nefarious empires like the British, the Soviets, and all that. They saw it as a neutral democratic power, but then the coup d'etat basically ended that romance of a neutral global power that is unselfish, and kind of brought in an era of like dark dictatorship, but also rapid modernization from above. So there's a lot of that history that kind of wove into the revolution. And so, the post-revolution regime in Iran kind of really ended up defining itself based on one or two things. One was like this notion of Islam, like religion being the center, the core idea of the new regime, which, is kind of very debatable because, religion wasn't in danger in pre-revolution Iran. The religious class that was, but also there was a lot of discontent. But then the second idea that mobilized the post-revolutionary regime was its anti-Americanism. Its insistence that we are an independent power. So I think this is a kind of a ideological hardcore of this regime in Iran that it wants to say a few things, that it's the only power that is independent and stands against the bullying, as they call it, of the U.S. and other foreign powers, that we're independent. And the second point is like the symbolic things that kind of, in their eyes, define revolution. I mean, Islamic purity. And one of those is the attire of women and public attire and public behavior. So among many other things, the politics of dress has become really important. And Iranian women who have been forced since the revolution to wear officially, like cover their hair and their bodies, who've been resisting against this, although many women are religious, others aren't, but the point is, should the state be dictating this or not, has become a politicized issue and a political bone of contention between the public and the state that, that's one of the symbolic things that became, that sparked the current wave of protests and rebellion.
Let me go back to the Iranian Revolution. The person that stood out for me was this fellow Bani Sadr, and the next thing, and my sense was it was progressive. There were a lot of progressive forces involved. In some of the research I did, I saw mention of the Communist Party and other left-wing non-communist parties, etc. Bani Sadr sort of disappeared, and the next thing we know, we had this kind of religious dictatorship going on. Can you fill in just briefly what happened to him and how that changed?
Bani Sadr was, you're one of the few people who thinks he was a very significant figure.
Well, he may not have been, that's who I remember.
Bani Sadr was an economist by training. Who lived in France. He was a student activist and then, remained a kind of a maverick economist who, had a religious streak, but also was a sort of a liberal. He never represented he was never kind of established a political movement, an organization. He was a figure that was associated with a number of other figures among Iranian diaspora against the monarchy. And then after the revolution, he, because of his family relations to Ayatollah Khomeini, who became the leader of the Iranian Revolution, he kind of moved with him, and, he kind of, because of his training as an economist, he was, appointed, given positions of power, and then in a field that had very little formal competition, he was elected president, the first president. And then after a year, when the Iran-Iraq war started, he kind of began to take, independent positions, and he was pushed out, and he went into exile. And, kind of never returned to Iran. So he did play a historical role as the first elected president of Iran, but he was never consistently a Democrat or a leftist. He was ambitious. He enjoyed being acting president. He was not particularly good at it and effective because he did not manage to actually create and form a movement. So he's an important figure historically, but I don't think he had a huge influence on subsequent politics. And there are many others like him. There were a lot of names, that propped up. And the post-revolution period in Iran was a period of turmoil and civil conflict and external war, especially against Iraq, that lasted for 8 years till 1988.
Well, Kaveh Ehsani, let me go to today, where Iran has been in the news most dramatically for, as you referred to, as the politics of dress, where women, these kind of police go around, and if people aren't dressed properly, they arrest them. So there have been massive demonstrations. And then there also, this sort of coincides with the World Cup, which, Iran has a good soccer team, and soccer is very popular. And lo and behold, they get matched up against the United States. The United States won that match, but the Iranian soccer players did not sing the national anthem, even though they stood. There was some talk about repercussions at home. Talk to us a little bit about all of those things, the politics of dress and the current demonstrations, and the reaction to the defeat and the actions of the Iranian soccer team.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Whatever you want to share.
Yeah. Okay. So let me say this, that 1979 revolution in Iran was a very significant event because it was an actual social revolution where, you had millions of people in the street effectively peacefully demonstrating, unarmed, against one of the best armed, police states and militaries in the world. And this lasted a year, and the monarchy was brought down, which was like the strongest state at that point in the Middle East. And this new regime emerged out of ordinary people who kind of supported it, right? So for better or for worse, it's a product of that society and, and this huge, historic social revolution, the outcome of which was determined by violence, like who came out stronger, as many revolutions do, actually, So, this kind of started like, all big political movements, as, for example, in the case of American Revolution. I mean, the Constitution really matters, the constitutional processes and voting and all that are really the core of American polity. In France, street demonstrations and, strikes and all that after the French Revolution have become part and parcel of political action and political culture. And the same goes with Iran. I mean, we've, since the revolution in particular, you have a population that has not been cowed or intimidated by political violence or repression, even though there's been plenty of it. And they've also, Iranian system has been a very hybrid system until quite recently. So it was Republican as well as theocratic, the rule of the men of religion, but also an elected parliament and elected president under really kind of limited elections, not truly open, but competitive, relatively, right? So it's a very weird system. And because of, the economy, because of the political situation, a lot of discontent, various sectors of Iranian society have never been shy to kind of demonstrate and come out and, workers, women, nurses, professionals, doctors, they've been repressed, but they've been never shy of kind of courageously going out and kind of staking their claim to citizenship. And this has been really important part of Iranian political culture since the revolution. So the current uprising is spearheaded by women, but it's not only limited to women. I mean, it really is it's a combination of many, many crises that have been piling up: economic, regional, ethnic, religious, discontent against a system that has become increasingly ossified and authoritarian, especially since 2008 and even before that, right? So you have a huge economic crisis. You have unprecedented, inflation, unemployment. You have a huge population of young people who are highly educated, university educated, high school degrees that expect, a professional life or, standards of living commensurate with the work that they've put in. So there's a lot, and workers who are not being paid, who have, wages in arrears, people, in the press, artists, and so on and so forth. So women are really at the forefront of this, saying that enough is enough. Which the state should have no business kind of dictating what we should wear in public. This is not part of religion. This is not part of Islam. It's anybody, how pious you are is your personal business, not the state's. So that's, that kind of exploded after a woman was murdered by the police, by the so-called morality police, beaten and kind of her, head crushed. But there was a lot of discontent, and there's a lot of prehistory to that, So there's, it was like a explosion waiting to happen. And then all these other discontents, minorities who are being kind of silenced, pensioners whose pensions have kind of evaporated because of mismanagement and corruption and inflation that is due to the sanctions that Iran is under, and so on and so forth. All of these exploded and have kind of banded together in this sustained wave of protests that has been lasting more than 2 months now. And, there's no signs that it's kind of abating, despite the fact that at least 300-400 people have been killed. There's 18,000 people in jail. And the level of repression and the threats of repression are just kind of rising. So, it's what we're seeing in Iran today is quite fascinating. It's kind of both worrisome and worrisome because, we haven't seen this regime, despite the horrible level of violence that we've witnessed, it can do a lot worse. I mean, it can turn into Syria, where you have a regime that has no answer except brutality against its own people. And people in Iran are kind of demanding the rights of citizenship. They're demanding that, okay, this constitution, flawed as it is, it gives the right to public protest and it gives the right to public assembly. Why is it that we're being repressed? Where does in the constitution say that universities have to be sex segregated? The constitution explicitly says that the rights of minorities should be, to their cultural life and also equality in terms of resources and voice in politics has to be respected. Why is it not the case? So it's the democratic demands for citizenship, and then eventually a rejection of the system that is not answering, that is kind of denying them all these rights. And so we're kind of on the verge of a military coup, a bloodbath, or forcing this regime to actually kind of maybe accommodate and push back and open up the free elections and reform itself. I'm not optimistic.
Well, I was going to say, which way do you think it'll go?
It's anybody's guess. I mean, that's what I think. I am not the only one who's profoundly worried, hopeful to some extent, but also profoundly worried about what the outcome will be. Given the state of politics in that region and in the world, look, you and I are looking at American politics. I mean, you and I when we were corresponding, we were saying, "Oh, let's hope something good happens in Georgia," which happened. But 2 years from now, what will be the future? I mean, like, we live in a time of uncertainty because of the political economic system that has caused climate change and rise of fascistic populism, because people are losing any kind of trust in institutions, in norms, in promises of economic and political systems that are really stacked against them. Iran is no different. So the future is unknown. But what I'm optimistic about is that the agency of ordinary Iranians who are just not being cowed and are just kind of persisting through strikes, through demonstrations, through bravery, to kind of voice what they're demanding, equality, the rule of law, and the rights of citizenship.
So we have students on the move, we have workers on the move, we clearly have women on the move. Any other forces at work that you want to call attention to?
Yeah, there are many things that are quite worrisome. I think I see a lot of truly disturbing signs in diaspora politics. There's 3-4 million Iranians abroad, I think, who kind of are, worried about what is going on in Iran, are participating. But I also kind of, often diaspora politics everywhere is problematic. In the case of Iranians, since we're in the US, I think what I see, which really worries me, is that Iranian diaspora politics is beginning to resemble Cuban diaspora politics in Florida and Miami. This kind of almost rabid, anti-democratic, depoliticized, vehement rejection of calls for U.S. military intervention, calls for increasing sanctions, economic sanctions posed on Iran, which really are hurting ordinary people. They're not hurting, and we've seen the politics of sanctions, unfold in Iraq, in Cuba, elsewhere. It's been devastating, hollowing out civil societies. We've seen what increasing militarization does. U.S. has had no answer to dealing with Iranian politics and legitimate and illegitimate, characteristics of the Iranian system, except through military language. The main television stations that broadcast into Iran, some are journalistic, like BBC, Persian, but then some are funded by Saudi Arabia or by the Israeli lobby or by the CIA, and they're like Fox News. They remind me, when I watch them, they remind me of Fox News. No journalism, complete, ideological propaganda. So this kind of this kind of space of political space of media space that is anti-democratic and non apolitical and ideological really worries me, because it leaves no room for negotiation, no room for kind of finding non-violent solutions to what is going on in Iran. And I'm not sure how much is actually supporting the movement in Iran, rather than trying to shape it at any cost for an overthrow of a regime. And for me, regime change is something that has to come from within, not from outside.
Kaveh Ehsani, let me ask you about the nuclear deal. Under Obama, we made arrangements with Iran around nuclear testing and development. And when the last guy, I think his name is Trump, came in, he negated that deal. What's your sense of the loss of the deal and the potential for working another deal?
Well, I mean, I think situation has changed. I mean, when it happened, I think I'm of the opinion that what Trump did was disastrous. I think I'm also of the opinion that this had a long history. I mean, Obama waited till the last year to do this. There were many occasions for others, previous predecessors, even Bush, or certainly Clinton, to kind of like make some kind of an accord with Iran, and kind of demilitarize the relationship while kind of maintaining a strong position on human rights and commerce, but like demilitarize the relationship. And this never happened. I mean, remember, after 9/11, the then reformist president of Iran, Khatami, actually, kind of extended sympathy to, America against the Taliban, and even opened up Iranian airspace for the U.S. incursion into Afghanistan, for better or for worse. And then Bush came out with his whole language of regime change and axis of evil, and basically remilitarized that whole relationship, and basically put a stop to any kind of entente and opening up, which would have changed the political dynamic within Iran and also between Iran and the U.S. The same thing happened with Obama. The same thing happened with Trump. I mean, I do not, I have zero sympathy for the Iranian regime, but I think they have used repeatedly, the military anti-democratic leaders of Iran have used the military confrontational position of the US and its geopolitics in the region as a way of justifying their own repression at home, right? If this was taken away, I mean, if this, and remember, Iran was kind of complying with the nuclear deal. I mean, like, every authority, was saying, UN was saying that, look, yeah, they're complying, right? But what Trump did was basically put an end to this and kind of opened up the hand of Iranian military and security apparatus to just say, all right, enough is enough. We're going to monopolize the whole power, and we're just going to, move on towards military confrontation. So I'm not sure if we can go back to that anymore.
Kaveh, you've enlightened me a lot, and I think our listeners will appreciate it. I would like to officially invite you back on the show a little bit down the line to fill us in on events as they unfold. But also, I would really love it if you would talk to us next time about your research into the historical and contemporary impact of oil on society and politics. It sounds like one hell of a topic that we all could use a little dose of.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Okay, any parting words you want to make from this segment?
No, I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, follow the news in Iran. It's probably I'm saddened that the world politics is so full of warfare and violence, Ukraine and so on and so forth. So there are other issues that are equally important, and they're just kind of getting sidetracked. And I think the struggle of Iranians, and especially Iranian women, is really important. And I wish I'm grateful that you paid attention to it, and I hope your followers do too.
Yeah, and it's pretty inspirational, I got to say. Okay, thank you so much for coming on. I really hope I meet you in person. We're on the same, we're on faculty at the same school,
Cool.
and I look forward to running into you.
Likewise. Have a good day.
Okay, Everybody, you are listening to the Live from the Heartland show. You may be watching it. You can get us on YouTube. You can get us on podcast at Spotify and Google, Can TV, youtube.com/Heartland Media. I think we're close to the end of the show, so I want to thank everybody who makes the show possible. Josie Stoller, program director over at WLUW, Katie Hogan, Lynn Orman-Weiss, Tom Clark, Hal James, and of course our guest today, Kaveh Ehsani and Dick Simpson. And next week, we will be back with another edition of the show. And I think Katie Hogan, who was going to come on today, is going to come on and talk a little bit. And those of you who are regular listeners will be glad. There's a lot going on in the world. We encourage you to observe it, to participate in it, to move things a little bit to the left or a positive direction. And once again, we encourage you all to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Kaveh does, that all of us do together, because it makes a difference. All power to the people. Have a great week.